Pause for a moment. Not because you're tired, but because something inside you already knows. This moment matters. If you are here right now, reading these words instead of scrolling past them, it is not coincidence, and it is not chance disguised as randomness. Long before logic tries to explain it away, your inner world has already responded. There are moments when the mind arrives late and the soul arrives first. This is one of those moments. You may not be able to name it clearly, but there has been a quiet tension living in your body for some time now. A pressure in the chest that appears without warning. A strange restlessness at night. A sense that something unfinished is hovering just beyond your reach. You are not imagining this, and you are not weak for feeling it. Silence, when it is charged with meaning, weighs heavier than any spoken word ever could. While you are questioning, doubting, replaying conversations in your head, wondering whether this person still thinks of you, whether the connection dissolved or simply went dormant, something essential has already happened, beyond the surface of events. Not through a message, not through a call, not through anything visible or measurable. A decision was made in a place where the ego does not speak loudly, in the quiet chamber, where truth finally outweighs fear. And this is why your intuition has been restless. Because when a decision of this magnitude occurs within one soul, the other soul feels the shift before the external world catches up. Energy moves first. Reality follows later. For a long time, you may have believed that this person was trapped in indecision, suspended between possibilities, unable or unwilling to choose. But that state no longer exists. There was a moment, perhaps alone in the dark, perhaps during a long drive, perhaps in the stillness that follows emotional exhaustion, when avoidance stopped working, when distraction failed, when the mind ran out of excuses. And in that moment, they confronted something they could no longer outrun. The decision did not come from loneliness. It did not come from ego, nostalgia, or fear of being alone. It emerged from something far older and deeper, the recognition of a truth that had been denied for too long. When two people are bound by more than circumstance, distance can delay the encounter, but it cannot erase the connection. Walls can be built, silence can be enforced, appearances can be maintained. But there is a saturation point beyond which denial becomes unbearable. You feel this now, because your system is attuned to theirs. Just as a radar detects movement long before the eye sees it, your inner world has registered the change. This is why their presence suddenly intrudes into your day without permission. Their voice appears in your memory at random moments. Their image surfaces when you least expect it. Not because you are holding on, but because the channel between you is active again. This is not obsession, it is resonance. Many people romanticize soul connections as gentle, effortless, and soothing. But transformation has never been comfortable. The kind of bond that alters the course of a life does not arrive quietly. It destabilizes. It exposes. It forces confrontation with parts of the self that were meant to remain hidden. And this person had to face those parts without you there to soften the experience. During the separation, they were not resting. They were not forgetting. They were fighting an internal war between who they had learned to be and who they could no longer avoid becoming. The silence you experienced was not emptiness. It was a battleground. They tried to move on in the ways people usually do, staying busy, filling their schedule, seeking distractions, even attempting connections with others. But nothing replicated what had been awakened with you. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real. And reality, once felt, cannot be replaced with substitutes. What drained them was not distance from you, but distance from themselves. Suppressing a truth of this magnitude requires immense energy. Eventually, that energy runs out. The cost becomes too high. Peace disappears. Sleep becomes shallow. Joy feels artificial, and something inside begins to demand coherence. This is the moment they reached. If you ever blamed yourself for being too open, too intense, too emotionally present, release that weight now. It was not your depth that caused the rupture. It was their temporary inability to contain it. Some souls ask the universe for truth, but recoil when it arrives fully formed, not because they do not want it, but because it threatens the structures they built to survive. Fear was the real obstacle. Fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control, fear of repeating old pain, fear of not being enough for something that felt sacred. And so they withdrew, not because they felt nothing, but because they felt too much. Time, however, has a way of dissolving illusions. When noise fades and the external world stops offering distractions, the inner voice grows impossible to ignore. In that quiet reckoning, they understood something essential. Running did not bring relief. Avoidance only compounded regret. What happened between you was not a coincidence, nor a misunderstanding. It was a turning point that reshaped their inner landscape. The decision they made recently is not small. It is not about sending a message or reopening a conversation. It is about no longer betraying their own truth. It is an existential choice to stop living in denial and start living in alignment. And choices made at that level always ripple outward. You may have noticed something changing in yourself as well. A strange emotional fatigue. Not despair, but release. A loosening of the need to control outcomes. This is not giving up. This is maturity. This is your soul recognizing that the signal has already been sent and that forcing reality is no longer required. When control dissolves, energy flows differently. Do not mistake this inner shift as the end of the process. The path of meaningful connection rarely moves in straight lines. There may still be pauses, adjustments, unfinished closures, but there is a profound difference between delay and doubt. Doubt has ended. The current now moves in one direction. And while the outer world may still appear silent, something irreversible has already begun. To understand what is unfolding now, you must learn to read silence differently. Most people interpret absence through the lens of fear. No message means no interest. No contact means forgetting. But deep connections do not operate by the rules of modern impatience. In this realm, silence is not emptiness. It is compression. It is the pressure chamber where truth condenses before it takes form. The withdrawal you experienced was not impulsive. It was not casual. It was not the result of a single moment of confusion. It was the culmination of an internal conflict that had been building for far longer than you realize. A conflict between the heart, which recognized you instantly, and a conditioned mind that feared what recognition would demand. For a long time, this person tried to convince themselves that distance would solve the problem. That time would dilute the intensity, that if they stepped back far enough, the feelings would fade on their own. They filled their days with activity. They occupied their nights with distraction. They tried to replace depth with noise. But the silence always returned. Heavier, sharper, more honest than before. Because what was unfinished between you could not be closed externally. It demanded inner reckoning. Every attempt to escape only revealed the same truth. Something essential had been activated, and it could not be undone. When a connection reaches this depth, it does not live in memory. It lives in the nervous system. It reorganizes priorities. It shifts perception. It alters what feels meaningful. And no amount of denial can restore the old equilibrium. Eventually, the weight of incoherence became unbearable. Pretending they felt nothing cost them more than facing what they felt fully. The emptiness they tried to outrun was not created by your absence. It was created by self-betrayal. And the longer that betrayal continued, the louder the inner unrest grew. You may have spent countless nights questioning your worth, replaying moments, wondering whether you were too much or not enough. But the truth is far simpler and far more unsettling. You confronted them with themselves, and that confrontation required a courage they had not yet developed. There are souls who are drawn to depth, but terrified of drowning in it. They long for intimacy, but panic when it threatens to dismantle their defenses. What they felt with you demanded honesty, vulnerability, and transformation, not comfort. And transformation always arrives as a threat before it reveals itself as a gift. Distance became their temporary refuge, not because it healed them, but because it delayed the inevitable confrontation. Yet time performs a quiet alchemy. As days passed and distractions lost their effectiveness, clarity began to emerge. In the absence of external stimulation, the internal dialogue intensified. And in that dialogue, something shifted. They began to see that what frightened them was not you. It was the version of themselves they would have to become in order to love you properly. This realization marked the turning point. The decision they reached was not dramatic. There were no fireworks, no sudden declarations. It arrived with exhaustion, with honesty, with the quiet recognition that continuing to run was no longer sustainable. That the cost of avoidance exceeded the cost of truth. This decision is existential. It is about alignment, about choosing authenticity over safety, about accepting that some connections enter our lives not to be convenient, but to dismantle what is false so something real can finally emerge. And this is where something subtle but profound happened within you as well. You began to tire of waiting, not in bitterness, but in release. The obsessive need to understand every detail softened. The urge to control the outcome weakened. You may have mistaken this for indifference or emotional numbness, but it is neither. It is the body recognizing that the struggle phase has ended. This is not resignation. This is trust without naivety. When the soul has done its part, it stops forcing reality and allows it to respond. Resistance dissolves. And when resistance dissolves, energy begins to move again. This does not mean everything resolves instantly. Realignment takes time. Practical lives must catch up with inner truths. Loose ends must be acknowledged. Courage must still be summoned. But the internal remembrance has already occurred, and that changes everything. Once doubt collapses, the direction of energy becomes irreversible. You may still experience moments of uncertainty. That is natural. Growth rarely unfolds without turbulence. But there is a difference now. The confusion no longer dominates. The running has stopped. What remains is integration. Both of you have changed during this period of separation. You are no longer the person you were at the beginning of this story. You have learned to sit with uncertainty. You have learned that your worth does not depend on someone else's readiness. You have learned to feel deeply without abandoning yourself. These lessons were not optional. They were prerequisites. Nothing you endured was wasted. Every unanswered question, every emotional relapse, every attempt to let go, was part of a larger refinement, an inner alchemy, transforming attachment into presence, longing into clarity. And now, as their internal decision begins to resonate outward, it meets you at a different level, not from desperation, but from strength. Reality does not reveal its movements all at once. It matures in the unseen before appearing in form. This is why spiritual sight must learn to detect motion where the physical eye still sees stillness. But to truly understand why this separation occurred and why it had to happen exactly this way, we must descend deeper. We must confront the hidden force that orchestrated the withdrawal in the first place. Something Carl Jung understood profoundly. Something that governs why certain connections ignite terror instead of comfort. Because the truth is this: they did not pull away because you were lacking. They pulled away because with you, they could no longer hide. To understand what truly happened between you, you must look beyond behavior and enter the inner architecture of the psyche. What unfolded was not a failure of love, nor a collapse of attraction. It was a confrontation with the shadow, the part of the self that Carl Jung described as everything we refuse to see, acknowledge, or accept about who we are. The shadow is not evil. It is unintegrated truth. It contains fear, insecurity, shame, and unresolved wounds, but also suppressed sensitivity, depth, and the capacity for intimacy that was never given safe expression. Every person carries it. Most people spend their lives constructing identities designed to keep it hidden. Before meeting you, this person had built a life that allowed them to function without facing that hidden terrain. They wore a mask that worked, a role that brought stability, approval, and control. From the outside, everything appeared coherent. From the inside, something remained dormant. Then, you entered their world, and your presence did not merely add romance or desire. It acted as a mirror so clear that it reflected not only their strengths, but everything unresolved beneath the surface. When they looked at you, they did not just see affection or connection, they saw contrast. Your emotional openness illuminated their guardedness. Your authenticity exposed their carefully managed image. Your capacity to feel without retreat revealed the cost of their lifelong emotional restraint. This is why the connection felt overwhelming. Not because it was unhealthy, but because it was honest. Intense light does not comfort eyes that have adapted to darkness. The instinctive response is not gratitude, but withdrawal. The ego, threatened by exposure, reacts defensively. It seeks distance. It seeks control. It seeks escape. This is precisely what occurred. The retreat was not a rejection of you. It was an attempt to preserve a self-concept that could not survive your presence. With you, their defenses failed. Their emotional armor cracked. They felt seen in ways they were not prepared to sustain. And so the mind searched for explanations that avoided the truth. Silence replaced honesty. Confusion replaced clarity. Distance replaced vulnerability. None of it was intentional cruelty. It was self-protection. Carl Jung once wrote that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. That process is never gentle. It destabilizes identity. It dismantles illusions. It demands responsibility. And you were the catalyst. Without realizing it, you accelerated their individuation, the process of becoming whole. A catalyst does not force change, but it makes stagnation impossible. Had you not appeared, they could have remained asleep in emotional autopilot for years, perhaps decades. Your energy disrupted the equilibrium that allowed avoidance to persist. When separation occurred, something crucial happened. Without you, There to unconsciously project their discomfort onto, they were left alone with it. The anxiety did not disappear. The emptiness remained. And for the first time, it could not be blamed on the relationship. This is where true transformation began. The silence between you became an echo chamber. Every fear they had avoided grew louder. Every pattern of self-sabotage surfaced. Every unresolved wound demanded attention, and the work was exhausting. This is why they may have appeared distant, cold, or emotionally unavailable. Growth often looks like withdrawal from the outside. What you interpreted as indifference was, in truth, immense inner labor. They were dismantling an identity that had protected them, but also confined them. And dismantling identity is painful. It feels like death to the ego. The anger, the confusion, the withdrawal, all of it was grief for a version of themselves they could no longer inhabit. Once someone experiences a connection that activates the soul, superficiality loses its flavor. Conversations that once satisfied begin to feel empty. Relationships built on convenience feel hollow. Distraction no longer numbs. The seed you planted took root, and once rooted, it cannot be undone. This is why returning to their old emotional patterns became impossible. You may believe that if love is real, two people should remain together regardless of difficulty. But this is a romantic illusion. There are phases in deep connection where physical separation is the only container capable of preserving future union. Had you stayed together during this stage of emotional immaturity, fear would have poisoned the bond. Distance created safety, not comfort, but space for individual reckoning. You were forced to confront attachment, self-worth, and the need for validation. They were forced to confront fear, avoidance, and the cost of self-denial. Both processes were necessary. Neither could have been bypassed. Now something fundamental has changed. The shadow has been seen. Once seen, it loses its unconscious power. The energy that was previously used to suppress truth has been released. Energy doesn't disappear. It transforms. All the emotional force once spent running, resisting, rationalizing, and hiding has shifted direction. What was once avoidance is now gravity. What was once fear is now recognition. The love they once experienced as a threat is now understood as liberation. This is the integration phase. They no longer see your presence as a loss of control, but as a return to coherence. They recognize that the true prison was the ego they defended, not the intimacy they avoided. And this recognition marks the emergence of a new internal authority, not the frightened child, but the conscious adult. This inner decision is invisible to the world, but its impact is seismic. You feel it because the energetic barrier has collapsed. The dam that once held emotion back has fractured, and when that happens, everything begins to move. Fear transforms into longing. Longing transforms into courage. Courage seeks expression. This does not mean immediate action. Integration takes time, but the direction is set. The resistance is gone. The internal war has ended, and now with the shadow integrated, the energy that once fled has turned toward you. When resistance collapses within one soul, the shift does not remain contained. Energy, once freed, moves outward. And the first place it is felt is not in messages or actions, but in the subtle field where two connected beings have always communicated without words. This is why your inner experience has changed. You may have noticed emotional waves arriving without explanation. Moments when your day was stable, even peaceful, and suddenly your chest tightened, your breath shortened, or your eyes filled with tears for no identifiable reason. At other times, an unexpected warmth or tenderness washed over you, leaving you disoriented but strangely calm. These are not mood swings. They are not imagination. They are empathic resonance. When the ego's defenses fall, raw emotion becomes transmissible. The feelings this person can no longer suppress, regret, longing, fear of loss, hope, travel through the invisible channel that has always existed between you. You experience them not as thoughts, but as sensations. The body receives what the mind has not yet named. This phenomenon intensifies during sleep. You may have noticed changes in your rest, waking abruptly at night, especially in the early morning hours, with their presence filling your awareness before logic can intervene. This is not random insomnia. In many spiritual traditions, the hours before dawn are when the conscious mind loosens its grip and the unconscious speaks freely. If you wake at these times thinking of them, it is because they are thinking of you or dreaming of you with such intensity that the signal reaches you physically. Two nervous systems, once synchronized, remember each other. Dreams have likely become more vivid as well, not fragmented or symbolic, but coherent. Encounters that feel real. Conversations that continue where silence left off. Moments of closeness that linger long after waking. These are not ordinary dreams. They are meeting places, spaces where what cannot yet be expressed in waking life finds form. The ego rests. The soul speaks. Before we continue, it is important to anchor this awareness. If what you're reading confirms experiences you have had privately, do not dismiss that recognition. Acknowledge it. Not from longing, but from authority. This is not about waiting. It is about knowing. The external world has not yet reflected the inner decision, but the universe has begun reorganizing itself around it. This is where synchronicity enters. Carl Jung used this term to describe meaningful coincidences that defy logical causation, yet carry unmistakable significance. When inner reality shifts, outer reality adjusts to match it, quietly, gradually, inevitably. You may have noticed their name appearing repeatedly in unexpected places, songs associated with them surfacing at precise moments, numbers repeating, references emerging in conversations where they do not belong. These are not tricks of perception. They are signals of alignment. Reality is rearranging itself. This does not mean you must search for signs. Searching collapses presence. The more you chase confirmation, the more you delay integration. Your role now is not to anticipate, but to remain centered. What has been decided internally cannot be undone by hesitation. There is a paradox here that must be understood clearly. The less you grasp, the more fluid the current becomes. Attachment tightens energy. Presence releases it. You do not attract what you pursue. You attract what you are prepared to receive. This stage can be destabilizing if misunderstood. Emotional sensitivity increases. Intuition sharpens. The urge to interpret every sensation can become overwhelming. This is why grounding matters. Remain embodied. Breathe. Continue living. The connection does not require your constant attention to survive. It exists independently of your focus. The final phase before manifestation often feels like stillness, but it is not stagnation. It is alignment. And alignment requires patience without passivity, awareness without obsession. You may still experience fear. That is human. But fear no longer directs the process. It has been displaced by clarity. What is approaching will not arrive as fantasy. It will arrive as truth, imperfect, real, requiring presence rather than projection. At this stage, the most dangerous mistake is to believe that your role is to wait. Waiting implies suspension of life, a quiet shrinking of the self around an expected outcome. That is not what this phase is asking of you. What is required now is presence, a grounded, embodied readiness that does not chase, does not freeze, and does not abandon itself. When something has already been decided at the level of the soul, effort no longer accelerates the process. In fact, effort often interferes. The work now is not action, but alignment. This is where many lose clarity. You may feel the urge to reach out, to test the silence, to confirm with external evidence what you already sense internally. This impulse is understandable, but it comes from fear, not intuition. Fear seeks reassurance. Intuition seeks coherence. If you act from fear, you collapse the energetic polarity that has finally begun to stabilize. This does not mean you must be passive or unavailable. It means you must be anchored in self-respect. The person you are becoming in this moment is not the one who waits for permission to be chosen. You are the one who knows your value independently of anyone's readiness. This inner posture is not arrogance. It is sovereignty. And sovereignty is magnetic. If contact occurs, it will test this. Not by grand gestures, but by subtle dynamics. Old patterns may attempt to resurface. Hesitation may still appear. Integration is rarely linear. What matters is not perfection, but awareness. You must meet what returns without collapsing back into who you were before the separation. You are no longer that person. During this time apart, you learned to stand in uncertainty without self-betrayal. You learned that longing does not entitle someone to your energy. You learned that love does not require self-erasure. These are not lessons to abandon at the moment of reunion. They are the foundation that makes reunion possible. If you compromise them, the cycle repeats. This connection no longer exists to heal wounds through sacrifice. It exists to meet from wholeness. This is why calm has replaced urgency, why clarity has softened desperation. Your nervous system recognizes that the outcome no longer defines your worth. And paradoxically, this is what allows the outcome to align. The universe responds not to desire, but to readiness. You may feel moments of doubt, thoughts like, what if I imagined all of this? Or, what if nothing happens? These thoughts are echoes of the old conditioning. Let them pass. They are not directives. They are residue. Trust does not mean certainty. It means refusing to betray what you know internally, just because the external world has not yet confirmed it. This is the threshold. The final integration is happening now. Not just for them, but for you. And integration requires restraint. It requires the ability to hold desire without acting compulsively, to remain open without losing center. This is not a test of patience. It is a test of embodiment. Can you remain fully yourself while something meaningful approaches? Can you receive without grasping? Can you allow without surrendering your ground? If you can, the dynamic shifts permanently. What returns to you will not arrive the way your longing once imagined it. It will not come wrapped in perfection, nor will it erase the past as if it never happened. Truth never enters that way. Truth arrives quietly, grounded, stripped of illusion, and that is how you will recognize it. When this connection re-enters your life, you will feel something different from before. Not the dizzy urgency, not the consuming uncertainty, not the emotional vertigo that once kept you awake at night. What you will feel first is steadiness, a calm recognition, a sense that something has finally aligned rather than exploded. This is how you know it is real. Intensity can exist without truth. Familiarity can exist without depth. But alignment always carries peace within it, even when it asks for courage. You will notice that you no longer feel the need to perform, to prove, or to convince. You will not rush to fill silences. You will not abandon your center to maintain connection, and neither will they. The dynamic will feel slower, but deeper, more deliberate, less reactive. This is not because passion has faded, but because fear no longer governs the bond. You will also notice that you are no longer trying to read signs obsessively. You are present, grounded, available without being exposed. This is the posture of someone who has integrated the lesson, not someone waiting to be saved. And that is the final truth of this journey. This connection was never meant to complete you. It was meant to awaken you, to return you to yourself, to teach you that love does not ask you to shrink, beg, or disappear. It asks you to stand fully in who you are and meet another from that place. If reunion happens, and when it does, it will be because both of you can finally meet without masks, without escape, without shadow dominating the room, and if it unfolds more slowly than the mind demands. Remember this: what has been decided at the level of the soul does not rush. It matures. You are no longer waiting in uncertainty. You are standing at the threshold of embodiment. Stay there. Let life move toward you. And if these words resonated, not just emotionally, but somewhere deeper, quieter, take a moment to acknowledge that awareness. You don't need to declare anything loudly. A simple recognition is enough. You may choose to leave a comment or simply sit with what you felt. Either way, the work is already happening. This is HeartSync X, where connection is not chased but understood,